The moment the photographer touched my wrist, I knew something had shifted in the air, something dangerous, something final. His fingers didn't grip, they trembled slightly, as if they were holding back information that could shatter the world I was standing in. I was seated in the front row of the outdoor chapel, watching my grandson Ethan adjust his bow tie for the third time, his nervous smile identical to his father's on his wedding day. The string quartet had just begun the processional. Guests around me were dabbing tears, fanning themselves in the June heat, completely unaware that my pulse had turned into thunder in my ears. "Mrs. Douglas," Marcus whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell the faint scent of darkroom chemicals still clinging to his shirt. "Check your phone. Whatever you see, don't react. Not here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from." Now let's get to the story. My first thought was mundane. Perhaps my daughter needed me, or there was an issue with the caterer. I lifted my phone from my lap, expecting a text about seating arrangements or a delayed guest. What I saw instead turned my blood to ice. It was a photograph of me, taken from behind, inside the bridal preparation suite less than 20 minutes ago. I recognized the cream wallpaper, the vintage mirror where I'd helped Clara pin her veil, the bouquet of white peonies resting on the vanity. Only my daughter-in-law Emily and I had been in that room. No one else. The message beneath the photo was brief and brutal. "If you don't stop this wedding, you'll lose more than a grandson today." My hands went rigid around the phone. Someone had been close enough to photograph me without being seen. Close enough to watch me adjusting Clara's train, listening to Emily's nervous chatter about family and futures. Someone who wanted me terrified, and they had succeeded. I looked up slowly, careful to keep my expression pleasant, grandmotherly. Ethan stood at the altar in his charcoal suit, straightening his cuffs, his face full of that calm confidence that had always reminded me of his father. He had no idea that in this exact moment, I was questioning everything, whether this wedding was what it seemed, who sent that message, and most terrifying of all, whether the James family had finally come to collect a debt I thought was buried with my husband. My name is Lauren Douglas, and today was supposed to mark peace between two families that had spent decades in quiet war. Instead, it became the day I discovered that some debts don't die, they just wait for the perfect moment to demand payment. That morning had begun with the kind of beauty that feels almost fragile, as if it knows darkness is coming. I'd woken early in my guest suite at the Douglas estate, watching dawn paint the lake in shades of rose gold and soft lavender. My daughter Emily had knocked softly on my door at 6, already dressed, carrying coffee and a small box wrapped in ivory paper. "For you," she'd said, setting it on my vanity. "Dad would have wanted you to wear these today." Inside were my late husband's grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones he'd promised would one day go to the bride who united our family's legacy. Emily's eyes had filled with tears as she helped me fasten them, and I'd felt a wave of emotion so strong I'd had to look away. "Robert would be proud of Ethan," she whispered. "This wedding, it's what he always hoped for. Peace." My son had been killed in a car accident 3 years ago, his brakes failing on a road he drove every single day. The police had called it mechanical failure, driver error, an unfortunate tragedy. But Robert had whispered something to me the night before he died, something I'd never told anyone. "Mom, if anything happens to me, promise you'll keep Ethan safe from the James curse." I demanded to know what he meant, but he'd kissed my forehead and said we'd talk in the morning. By morning, he was gone. When Ethan announced his engagement to Clara James, daughter of Richard James, the man whose handshake at my husband's funeral had felt like ice wrapped in expensive fabric, something ancient and protective had awakened in my chest. But I'd smiled, approved, helped plan every detail of this wedding. Because if the James family thought time had made me forget, they were dangerously mistaken. The estate grounds had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. White orchids climbed trellises, thousands of tiny lights were woven through oak branches, and the tent overlooking the lake shimmered with gold and cream silk. Guests arrived in their finest clothes, air-kissing, reminiscing about business deals and charity galas where the Douglas and James families had once competed for dominance. I'd watched from my window as Richard James arrived, his silver hair perfectly styled, his wife Margaret on his arm like a trophy. He'd paused to shake hands with the minister, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. The same smile he'd worn when he told me, "Your husband was a brilliant man, Lauren. The world is lesser without him." I'd wanted to claw that smile off his face then. I still did. While my hair was being styled in soft waves, Ethan had sent me a video message. In it, he stood by the altar, the lake sparkling behind him, his expression so tender it made my chest ache. "Grandma," he said softly, "I know this hasn't been easy for you. But I need you to know, no matter what history lies between our families, I'm choosing love. I'm choosing Clara. And I hope you'll choose to believe that some things are bigger than the past." The words had touched something deep in my heart, but they'd also planted a seed of doubt. What did he mean by, no matter what history? How much did Ethan actually know about his father's death, about the silent war that had raged between our families for decades? I'd pushed the thought aside as paranoia. This was his wedding day. I would not poison it with old ghosts. As the ceremony time approached, Emily had helped adjust my hat, a wide-brimmed cream creation with a subtle pearl band that matched my earrings. "You look like royalty," she'd said, smiling through fresh tears. "Dad would be so proud." I'd squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of everything unsaid between us. "He's here with us," I'd whispered. "I can feel him." The music had begun, a soaring arrangement of Pachelbel's canon that made several guests reach for tissues. I'd taken my seat in the front row, directly across from Richard James, whose gaze had met mine for just a fraction of a second. In that brief look, I'd seen something I couldn't quite name. Recognition? Challenge? Fear? But then Ethan had appeared at the altar, and the world had softened again. My grandson, so much like his father, waiting to marry into the family I'd spent years suspecting of murder. And then Marcus had touched my wrist. And everything had changed. I slipped from my seat under the pretense of adjusting my corsage, my movements practiced and unhurried. Years of navigating high society functions had taught me how to exit a room without drawing attention. Marcus followed at a discreet distance, his camera equipment providing perfect cover. We stepped into the side hallway of the old chapel, a narrow corridor lined with portraits of previous wedding parties, their frozen smiles watching us from decades past. The music was muffled here, the laughter and conversation reduced to a distant hum. "Who sent this?" I demanded, my voice low but sharp. Marcus's jaw was tight, his usual calm photographer's demeanor replaced by something harder. "It came from an untraceable number." "But Lauren," he hesitated, then showed me his own phone. "There's more." Another photograph filled his screen. This one showed Ethan and Richard James standing behind the chapel near the service entrance, shaking hands. The image quality was poor, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the intimacy of the moment. They weren't greeting each other casually. This was deliberate, private, planned. The timestamp read 8:47 a.m., less than 2 hours ago. The caption beneath made my vision blur. "History repeats itself today. Ask your daughter what she knows." A memory slammed into me with physical force. My husband's funeral, 12 years ago. The reception held at this very estate, in the same tent where guests were now waiting for a wedding to begin. Richard James approaching me as I stood alone by the lake, his handshake lasting just a beat too long, his condolences wrapped in something that felt like ownership. "Your husband was too idealistic for his own good," he'd said quietly, his voice pitched so only I could hear. "He thought he could expose certain irregularities, without consequence. Some truths are better left buried, Lauren. For everyone's sake." I'd been too consumed by grief to challenge him then, too focused on raising a teenage grandson who just lost his father. But I'd never forgotten the way his eyes had held mine, not with sympathy, but with warning. And now, 12 years later, history was indeed repeating itself. "Marcus," I said slowly, my mind racing through possibilities, connections, timelines. "Whatever this is, it's not a warning. It's a declaration." Before he could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time the message came with a video attachment. My fingers felt numb as I pressed play. The footage was grainy, filmed secretly from what looked like a security camera angle. It showed my late husband years ago. I recognized his favorite navy suit, the reading glasses he only wore when reviewing documents, sitting in what appeared to be a private meeting room. He was sliding a folder across the table toward Richard James, who sat opposite him with the same cold expression I'd come to know so well. Richard opened the folder, his face hardening as he scanned the contents. Then he nodded once, slowly, and said something the camera couldn't capture. The angle shifted slightly, revealing a third person standing in the corner of the room, partially hidden by shadow. My daughter, Emily. She looked younger, her hair longer, but there was no mistaking her. She was watching the exchange between the two men, her expression unreadable but her presence undeniable. The video ended. I stood frozen in that hallway, the sounds of the wedding ceremony bleeding through the walls, the music, the rustling of programs, the anticipatory whispers of guests waiting for a bride who might never appear. Do you understand now? Marcus whispered, his voice filled with something that sounded like regret. Your daughter was there the day your husband died. She knows what happened. The phone nearly slipped from my hands. Emily. My daughter. The woman who'd held me as I sobbed through my husband's funeral, who'd helped raise Ethan when I couldn't bear to look at him without seeing his father's face, who'd stood by me through every dark moment of the past 12 years. Emily had been there. Emily had known. And she'd never said a word. I looked up at Marcus, saw my own shock reflected in his eyes, and understood with sudden, terrible clarity that this wedding was never about love or peace or new beginnings. It was about finishing what had started 12 years ago in that meeting room. It was about silencing the last person who knew the truth. I need to speak with Emily, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos roaring through my mind. Now. Before this ceremony goes any further. Marcus nodded, already moving toward the door. The bridal suite. She's helping Clara with final preparations. I straightened my shoulders, touched the pearl earrings my daughter had given me this morning, the ones meant to symbolize unity and legacy, and felt something inside me harden into resolve. If the James family wanted war, they would get it. But this time, I wouldn't be the one left grieving. The bridal suite was at the far end of the estate's east wing, a converted library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rose garden. As Marcus and I moved through the hallways, I felt the weight of this house pressing down on me, 12 years of memories, of carefully maintained facades, of questions I'd buried alongside my husband. Wait, Marcus said, catching my arm before we reached the suite. He pulled me into an alcove beneath the main staircase, the same spot where Ethan used to hide as a child when he didn't want to go to bed. Before you confront Emily, there's something you need to understand. His camera bag hung heavily from his shoulder. He unzipped it, pushed aside lenses and equipment, and pulled out a thin manila folder worn soft at the edges. The kind of folder that's been opened and reopened countless times over the years. I didn't just happen to be your wedding photographer today, Lauren, he said quietly. I've been waiting for this moment for 12 years. My stomach tightened. What are you talking about? Your husband and I were partners, Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. Not in business, in investigation. Robert came to me 6 months before he died. He discovered something at the Veterans Charity Foundation, something that went deeper than simple embezzlement. The Veterans Foundation. My husband had served on that board for 15 years, had treated it like a sacred trust. After his death, I'd resigned from all his charitable positions, unable to bear the reminders. What did he find? I asked, though part of me already knew. Part of me had always known. Marcus opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of financial documents, transfer records, photographs of men in suits shaking hands at galas and fundraisers. And at the center of it all, again and again, was Richard James. Money laundering, Marcus said. Millions of dollars being filtered through the charity, disguised as donations and operating expenses. Your husband traced it back to James's development company. He was using veterans, wounded soldiers, widows, families, as cover for moving dirty money. I closed my eyes, remembering Robert's late nights in his study, the tension that had settled into his shoulders those final months. I'd asked him what was wrong, but he'd always kissed my forehead and said, "Just some irregularities I need to sort out. Nothing for you to worry about." But he had been worried. Terrified, probably. Robert told me he was going to confront James, Marcus continued. He said he'd give him one chance to come clean, to shut it down quietly and make restitution. He believed in second chances, in redemption. He thought. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. He thought James would do the right thing. The meeting in the video, I whispered. That was the confrontation. Marcus nodded. 2 days before the accident. Robert brought Emily because she'd been doing volunteer work for the foundation. She'd noticed some of the same discrepancies. He wanted her there as a witness, as proof that this wasn't just one man's paranoid obsession. The hallway seemed to tilt around me. Emily had been 23 then, fresh out of college, idealistic and earnest. She'd adored her father, had wanted to follow in his footsteps of service and community leadership. And Robert had brought her into the line of fire. What happened after the meeting? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It was written in the past 12 years, in my daughter's careful avoidance of certain topics, in the way she flinched whenever someone mentioned her father. I don't know, Marcus admitted. Robert called me the night before he died. He sounded off. Said the meeting hadn't gone as planned, that James had made certain arrangements and he needed time to think. He told me to hold on to all the evidence, to keep it safe. Said if anything happened to him, he stopped, swallowing hard. He said if anything happened, I should protect Ethan. Those were his exact words. Protect Ethan. The music from the chapel swelled, marking another stage of the ceremony. They'd be wondering where I was by now, the mother of the groom's mother, missing from her seat during the most important moments. The brake failure wasn't an accident, I said. It wasn't a question. The police investigation was cursory, Marcus said carefully. There was an inspector who had questions, who wanted to dig deeper. He was transferred to a different department before he could file his report. The case was closed within a week. Mechanical failure due to age and wear. No further investigation recommended. I thought of Richard James's handshake at the funeral, the way he'd looked at me with those cold eyes. Some truths are better left buried, Lauren. You've been watching them this whole time, I said, understanding dawning. The James family. That's why you stayed close to us, why you offered to photograph the wedding. Marcus's expression was grim. I promised Robert I'd protect Ethan. When your grandson announced his engagement to Clara James, I knew it wasn't coincidence. The James family doesn't do anything without purpose. He pulled out his phone, opened an app one didn't recognize, and showed me streams of code and metadata. These messages you're receiving, they're sophisticated. Routed through multiple proxy servers, encrypted, virtually untraceable. But whoever's sending them knows intimate details about your family. The photo from the bridal suite was taken with a microcamera, probably planted days ago during setup. This isn't amateur hour, Lauren. This is someone with resources and planning. Someone who wants me to stop the wedding, I said. But why? If the James family orchestrated all of this, my husband's death, the cover-up, now Ethan's marriage, why would they warn me? Because, Marcus said slowly, what if it's not the James family sending the messages? What if someone else knows what happened 12 years ago? Someone who wants the truth exposed just as much as you do. The thought sent ice through my veins. How many people had known about Robert's investigation? How many had been silenced or bought off? And how many had been waiting, like Marcus, for the right moment to act? I thought back to Ethan's childhood after his father died. He'd been 7 years old, small for his age, with Robert's dark eyes and serious expression. Emily had wanted to keep him close, to smother him with protection and carefully monitored activities. But I'd insisted on something different. I'd taken him to the lake house, the one property my husband had owned outright with no business entanglements or charity connections. For 2 years, Ethan and I had lived there together while Emily rebuilt her life in the city. We'd fished and hiked and read books by the fireplace. I'd taught him to identify birds and plants, to swim in the cold lake water, to build fires and navigate by stars. And every night before bed, I'd told him the same thing: your father was a good man who stood up for what was right. No matter what anyone says, no matter what you hear, remember that. Goodness is worth fighting for. I'd thought I was protecting him from grief, from the darkness of adult complications. But really, I'd been protecting him from corruption, from the influence of people like Richard James who tried to bury the truth along with my husband. Now that same boy was about to marry into the family that had destroyed his father. I need to talk to Emily, I said firmly. Now. Before I make any decisions about what happens next. Marcus nodded, but his hand moved to his camera bag again. There's one more thing. I was going through old backup drives last night, organizing files from your husband's investigation. I found something I'd forgotten about, encrypted footage on a drive labeled Douglas_James09. My heart stopped. 2009, the year Robert died. I haven't been able to crack the encryption yet, Marcus said. But the file size suggests it's video footage, probably from the same security camera that captured the meeting. If we can access it, we'll have proof, I finished. Real evidence, not just copies of financial records that could be explained away. Exactly. But Lauren, Marcus's expression was grave. If this footage exists, and if the James family knows about it, that might be why they're moving now. The wedding might not be about love at all. It might be about containment. If Ethan marries Clara, any evidence against the James family becomes evidence against his own wife's father. It creates loyalty, complication, reasons to stay silent. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Turn the grandson of the man you murdered into your son-in-law, bind him with marriage and family ties, ensure that seeking justice means destroying his own happiness. How long until you can decrypt the footage? I asked. I have someone working on it. Maybe an hour, maybe less. Then we wait, I said, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. I'll talk to Emily, find out what she knows. You work on that encryption. And Marcus, I met his eyes. Whatever happens in the next hour, whatever I discover about my daughter's involvement, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that we'll finish what Robert started. No matter the cost. Marcus's hand closed around mine, his grip strong and sure. I promised him I'd protect Ethan. The best way to do that is to expose the truth. So yes, Lauren. We finished this. I straightened my hat, checked my reflection in the antique mirror hanging in the alcove. The woman looking back at me was 72 years old, dressed in cream silk and pearls, the picture of respectable grandmother at a society wedding. But beneath the facade, I was steel and fury and 12 years of buried grief finally coming to the surface. Emily was about to learn that a mother's love has limits. And the James family was about to discover that some debts can never be forgiven. Only paid in full. I found Emily in the West Corridor, the one lined with family portraits dating back 3 generations. She was standing beneath a painting of my husband in his military dress uniform, adjusting a strand of pearls at her throat, the same pearls I'd given her on her wedding day, the ones that had belonged to Robert's mother. Emily, I said, my voice cutting through the hushed quiet of the hallway. She turned, and for a moment, I saw the girl she'd been at 7, clutching her father's hand at a charity gala, her eyes wide with wonder at the glittering chandeliers. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Mom, you're missing the ceremony. Is everything? She stopped when she saw my face. What's wrong? I pulled out my phone, my hands remarkably steady despite the storm raging inside me. I need you to tell me about a meeting. 12 years ago. You, your father, and Richard James. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her hand went to the wall for support, fingers splayed against the cream wallpaper. Mom, I don't know what you're. Don't, I said sharply. Don't lie to me. Not now. Not about this. I held up the phone, pressed play on the grainy video. We both watched in silence as her father slid the folder across the table, as Richard James's expression hardened, as the camera angle shifted to reveal Emily herself standing in the corner, young and frightened and absolutely present. When the video ended, Emily's face had crumpled. Tears streamed down her carefully applied makeup, leaving tracks of mascara on her cheeks. "How did you get that?" she whispered. "That's what you're worried about?" "How I got it." My voice rose despite my best efforts to control it. "Emily, your father died 2 days after this meeting." 2 days. "And you never said a word." "Not to the police. Not to me. Not in 12 years. You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't know what happened after." "Then tell me." I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Tell me why my husband is dead and you've been silent all this time. Tell me why you let me grieve alone, why you let me think it was an accident, why you," my voice cracked. "Why you let them get away with murder." Emily's whole body was shaking now. She pulled away from me, wrapping her arms around herself like a child seeking comfort. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Dad didn't tell you the whole truth about that meeting," she said. "He didn't just confront Richard about the money laundering. He threatened him. Said he was going to the FBI, to the press, to every regulatory agency that would listen. Richard, he stayed very calm. Too calm. He said Dad was making a mistake, that there were bigger forces at play than he understood." I could picture it perfectly. Robert, righteous and determined, believing that truth and justice would prevail. Richard, cold and calculating, already planning his next move. "Go on," I said. After Dad left, Richard asked me to stay behind. Emily's hands were trembling as she pushed hair back from her face. "He said he knew I'd been helping Dad with the investigation. Said he admired my loyalty, but that loyalty to the wrong cause could be dangerous. He told me my father was about to destroy not just him, but dozens of families whose livelihoods depended on his company. Veterans who worked for him, suppliers, contractors." "Manipulation," I said flatly. "Classic manipulation. I know that now." Emily's voice rose, defensive and desperate. "But I was 23, Mom. I was scared. Richard said there was another way, a quieter way. He said if I could convince Dad to give him 90 days to wind down the operation, to make restitution gradually without destroying everything, he'd do it. He promised. He said no one had to get hurt." The pieces were falling into place, each one landing like a stone on my chest. "You believed him," I said. "You went to your father and asked him to wait." Emily nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Dad was so angry. He said Richard was buying time, that 90 days would give him a chance to hide evidence, intimidate witnesses. But I begged him, Mom. I told him there had to be a way to do the right thing without destroying so many lives. I said." She choked on the words. "I said maybe Richard deserved a chance at redemption. And 2 days later, your father's brakes failed on a road he drove every single day." The words came out like ice chips, sharp and cold. Emily collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor in her expensive dress, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins. She looked like a broken doll. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know. When the police came to tell us about the accident, I thought. I wanted to believe it was just fate, just terrible timing. But then Richard came to the funeral, and he looked at me, and I knew. I knew what he'd done. And you said nothing." The fury in my chest was expanding, threatening to consume everything else. "You let him walk away. You let him shake my hand and offer condolences for the husband he murdered. He threatened Ethan." Emily's voice cracked like a whip through the corridor. The day after the funeral, Richard came to me privately. He said he was sorry about Dad, that it was an unfortunate necessity, but that life goes on. Then he showed me a photo of Ethan at his school playground. Just a photo, nothing else. But the message was clear. If I talked, if I went to the police, my son would be next. My vision blurred with rage and grief and a terrible, crushing understanding. Emily had chosen Ethan's life over justice for Robert's death. In her position, terrified and alone with a 7-year-old son, might I have done the same? But 12 years. 12 years of silence. You could have told me, I said, my voice breaking. We could have protected him together. We could have. You were destroyed, Mom. You could barely get out of bed. And I was drowning, trying to be strong for Ethan, trying to hold myself together. Richard said if I stayed quiet, if I let it go, he'd leave us alone. So I did. I stayed quiet. I moved away. I kept Ethan close. And I prayed every single day that it was over. A soft beep interrupted us. Marcus's voice crackled through the small communications device he'd clipped to my collar earlier. Lauren, we have a problem. Security cameras just activated in your corridor. Someone's watching. I looked up and saw it, a small red light blinking on a camera mounted in the corner where the corridor turned. It hadn't been active when I'd walked past it minutes ago. Someone had just turned it on. They know we're talking, I said quietly. Emily's eyes widened. Who knows? Mom, what's going on? Before I could answer, movement outside the corridor windows caught my eye. Through the leaded glass, I could see the garden terrace where guests had gathered during the ceremony pause. Ethan was there with Clara, both of them laughing at something her mother had said. Clara's hand was on his arm, her face tilted up toward his with such genuine affection that it made my heart ache. They looked happy. Innocent. Completely unaware that their entire future was built on a foundation of lies and blood. My phone buzzed. Another message. This one was simple, direct, devastating. Don't trust your own blood. Below it was a scanned image of a bank statement. Emily Douglas. Account ending in 4892. A deposit dated 2 days after Robert's funeral, $500,000. Source, James Development Holdings, LLC. The world seemed to stop spinning. I turned slowly to my daughter, holding out the phone with a hand that had gone completely numb. Tell me this is fake. Emily's face went from pale to gray. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like she was drowning. Mom. Tell me you didn't take money from the man who killed your father. It wasn't like that. Emily scrambled to her feet, reaching for me. He said it was for Ethan's future, for his education, for security. He said it was the least he could do after what happened. I tried to refuse, but he said the money was already transferred, that there was nothing I could do about it, and I thought. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought if I took it, it would prove I wasn't going to talk. It would keep Ethan safe. You took blood money, I said, my voice hollow. You took payment for your father's murder and you used it to raise his grandson. I was trying to protect him. Emily's voice was raw with desperation. Everything I did was to protect Ethan. No, I said quietly. Everything you did was to protect yourself. From guilt. From consequences. From having to stand up and do what was right even when it was terrifying. Marcus's voice crackled again. Lauren, you need to move. Now. I'm seeing activity on multiple cameras. They're tracking you. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to that spot, staring at my daughter and seeing a stranger. The woman who'd held my hand through Robert's funeral, who'd helped me raise Ethan, who'd planned this wedding with such attention to detail, she'd been living a lie for 12 years. And I'd never suspected. Never even questioned. How much of this does Ethan know? I asked. Emily's silence was answer enough. He knows nothing, I said, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. You let him fall in love with Clara James, let him plan a future with the daughter of his grandfather's murderer, and you never warned him. You were going to let him marry into that family without ever knowing the truth. What was I supposed to do? Emily screamed, all composure shattering. Tell him his grandfather was murdered and I stayed silent? Tell him his whole life has been funded by blood money? Tell him his grandmother doesn't know her own daughter took payment for her husband's death? What would that accomplish except destroying him? The truth. I shouted back. The truth would accomplish the truth. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind us. Marcus appeared, his face tight with urgency. We need to go. Richard James just left the ceremony. He's heading this way. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this one with a video attachment. I pressed play with shaking fingers. The footage showed Emily, much younger, sitting across from Richard James in what looked like a bank office. Between them was paperwork. A check. Emily's signature, clear and unmistakable, on a deposit slip. But it was the audio that destroyed me. Richard's voice, calm and professional. This ensures everyone's safety, Emily. Yours, Ethan's, your mother's. All I ask is your silence. Emily's voice, small and frightened, and if I talk, then there are no guarantees. Accidents happen. Even to children. A pause. Then Emily's whisper, I understand. The video ended. I looked at my daughter, at the woman who'd chosen survival over justice, silence over truth, and felt something inside me break clean in two. Get out of my sight, I said quietly. Mom, please. Get out. The words echoed off the walls. Before I say something we can never take back. Emily stood frozen for one more moment, her face a mask of anguish and shame. Then she turned and ran, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor, leaving me alone with Marcus and the ghosts of 12 years of unanswered questions. The encryption is broken, Marcus said softly. The footage from 2009. I can show you everything now. I straightened my shoulders, touched the pearl earrings that had once symbolized unity and legacy, and felt them transform into something else entirely. Armor. Show me, I said. Show me everything. And then we're going to finish what Robert started. Justice had waited 12 years. It could wait a few minutes more. Marcus led me to a small study off the main hallway, a room that had once been my husband's private office. The irony wasn't lost on me, returning to Robert's sanctuary to finally uncover the truth about his death. Before I show you the footage, Marcus said, setting up his laptop on the mahogany desk, there's something else. I've been tracking the source of those messages. He pulled up a technical display, networks, IP addresses, signal traces. They're coming from inside the venue. Someone here, at this wedding, right now, is sending them through the estate's Wi-Fi network. A chill ran down my spine. Someone who wants me to know the truth. Or someone who wants to watch you react to it, Marcus countered. Before I could respond, the study door opened. Ethan stood in the doorway, still in his tuxedo, his bow tie loosened. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with barely controlled panic. Grandma, we need to talk. Now. I straightened, maternal instinct warring with suspicion. Ethan, you should be. I know about Grandpa Robert, he said, closing the door behind him. I know what Richard James did. Clara told me everything. The room seemed to tilt. What exactly did Clara tell you? Ethan ran his hands through his hair, destroying the careful styling. A week ago, Clara came to me crying. She said her father had gotten drunk and started talking about old business rivals, about making hard choices to survive. He mentioned Grandpa Robert. Said he was too rigid, too idealistic for his own good. My heart pounded. Go on. Clara pressed him for details. That night, Richard admitted it. He said Grandpa Robert threatened to expose his business dealings, that he'd given him no choice. He said the brake failure was a necessary business loss. I gripped the edge of Robert's desk. And you still went through with this wedding? Knowing what Richard did? Because Clara and I have a plan. Ethan pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Clara's been secretly copying files from her father's office for months. Financial records, emails, recordings. Everything we need to expose him. We were going to wait until after the wedding, until Clara was legally separated from his assets, then go to the FBI. Marcus took the flash drive, examining it. This is real? Clara risked everything to get them, Ethan said. She hates what her father is. She wants to be free of him. We thought if we got married first, it would protect her legally, make it harder for Richard to retaliate. I wanted to believe him. But something didn't add up. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan's face crumpled with guilt. Because I didn't want you to lose this day. I thought if I waited until after, if I could hand you Richard's arrest as a wedding gift. He trailed off. I thought I was protecting you. The same words Emily had used. Protection built on lies. Marcus's laptop chimed. He'd inserted the flash drive, files populating across the screen. His expression grew troubled as he scrolled. Ethan, when did Clara give you this drive? Yesterday morning. Why? Marcus turned the laptop toward us. These files are backdated. The metadata shows they were created yesterday, not copied over months. And look, he opened an email thread. These conversations reference the Douglas James wedding as a past event. This was all fabricated. The color drained from Ethan's face. No. That's not possible. Clara wouldn't. Wake up. I snapped. Clara is Richard's daughter. She's been raised in his world, taught his methods. Do you really think she'd betray him? You don't know her, Ethan said desperately, but his voice wavered. My phone buzzed. Another message. A photograph I'd never seen, Emily and Richard James in a coffee shop. The timestamp, 3 weeks ago. Emily was sliding an envelope across the table. Richard was smiling. The caption, the Douglas women have always known how to negotiate. The study door burst open. Emily stood there, breathless, makeup ruined, dress wrinkled. Mom, please. You need to stop whatever you're planning. Richard knows something's wrong. He's pulling security. If you expose him here, now, people will get hurt. People are already hurt. I shouted. Your father is dead. 12 years of lies. I know. Emily screamed back. But please, for Ethan's sake, just end the ceremony quietly. Send everyone home. We can deal with Richard later, through proper channels. Through the same proper channels that closed the investigation into Robert's death in a week? Marcus interjected. Emily's face hardened. You're going to get my son killed. Your son is already in danger, I said coldly. He's about to legally bind himself to the family that murdered his grandfather. Marcus pulled up another file. Lauren, you need to see this. The decrypted footage from 2009. He pressed play. The video was clearer, taken from a different angle. It showed Robert, Emily, and Richard James. After Robert left, Richard asked Emily to stay. Richard pulled out a checkbook. Emily shook her head, pushing it away. They argued. Then Richard pulled out his phone, showed her something. Emily's face went white. She stared at the screen, then at Richard. Whatever she saw broke her. She took the checkbook. Wrote the amount herself. $500,000. But the audio was damning. This is dated the day before your meeting with my father, Emily said, her voice shaking. You planned this before he even confronted you. Richard's smile was reptilian. Your father's brake line was compromised 3 days ago, Emily. Whether it fails tomorrow or next month depends entirely on whether he makes certain, unwise choices. You're blackmailing me with my father's murder before you've even committed it, Emily whispered. I'm offering you a choice. Convince your father to stand down, take the money for Ethan's future, and everyone lives. Or don't, and deal with the consequences. A pause. Then Emily's broken voice, if I take this money, if I convince Dad to wait, you'll leave him alone? I'll give him the 90 days he wants. After that, we'll see. Emily took the check. The video ended. I stared at the frozen image. Emily, did you warn your father? She was sobbing. I tried. I called him that night, told him Richard was dangerous, that he needed to go to the police immediately. But Dad said he just needed one more day to organize his evidence. One more day. He died the next morning. So you took the money anyway, I said. After Richard murdered him despite your negotiation, you still kept the money. What was I supposed to do? Emily screamed. Give it back? That would have changed nothing. Dad was already gone. You could buy your silence, I finished. You could tell yourself you were being practical instead of complicit. Marcus worked frantically on his laptop. The messages, I've isolated the source. He looked up, pale. They're coming from Clara's phone. Ethan staggered backward. No. That's not possible. She's been sending them all along, Marcus said. The photos, the threats, the videos. Everything. My mind raced. She wanted me to know. She wanted me to discover Emily's betrayal, to confront her. I looked at Ethan. She's been setting us up. But for what? Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Multiple people, moving with purpose. Richard James appeared in the doorway, flanked by two men in dark suits. Behind them, perfectly composed in her white wedding gown, was Clara. I believe, Richard said smoothly, we need to have a family conversation. Clara's eyes met mine, and in them I saw what I'd mistaken for innocence. It was calculation. Cold, precise, utterly ruthless. Hello, Mrs. Douglas, she said sweetly. I've been waiting for you to figure it out. Ethan turned to her, his face ashen. Clara? What is he talking about? Clara's smile didn't waver. Oh, darling. Did you really think I'd betray my own father? For you? She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. The flash drive, the tearful confession, the plan to expose him, it was all theater. We needed to know how much you knew, how much your family suspected. Why? Ethan's voice broke. Because, Richard said, stepping into the room, your grandfather left something behind when he died. Something we've spent 12 years looking for. And today, at this wedding, surrounded by everyone who matters, we're going to get it. He looked directly at me. The original files, Lauren. The real evidence. We know Robert gave them to someone before he died. And we know that someone is in this room. The trap had been perfectly laid. And we'd walked right into it. The silence in Robert's study was suffocating. Richard James stood in the doorway like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey, his security flanking him, Clara beside him in her pristine wedding gown. The contrast was obscene, all that white silk and lace covering something rotten. The original files, Richard repeated, his voice calm but edged with steel. Your husband was meticulous, Lauren. We found copies, fragments, pieces scattered across old hard drives and safety deposit boxes. But the master file, the one with the authenticated documents, the recorded conversations, the evidence that could actually hold up in court, that's still missing. I said nothing, my mind racing. Beside me, Ethan looked gutted, staring at Clara like she was a stranger. Emily had gone silent, pressed against the wall. We know he gave them to someone before he died, Richard continued. Someone he trusted absolutely. For 12 years, we've waited, watched, wondering when they'd surface. And then Ethan announced this wedding, and we realized, what better opportunity to flush out the truth. This entire wedding was a setup, I said quietly. Clara smiled, and it was her father's smile, cold and calculating. Not entirely. I do care for Ethan. He's sweet, earnest, so desperate to believe in redemption. She touched his face, he flinched away. But business is business. Daddy taught me that. The messages, Marcus said suddenly. You sent them to force a confrontation. You wanted Lauren to discover Emily's betrayal, to create chaos, to see who would break first and reveal where the files are hidden. Very good, Richard said. Though I must say, Emily's dramatic confession was unexpected. We knew about the money, of course, but hearing her admit it so publicly, quite touching. Emily made us sound like a wounded animal. There's just one problem with your plan, I said, straightening my shoulders, feeling Robert's presence like a hand on my back. You're wrong about one thing. Robert didn't give the files to someone he trusted. Richard's smile faltered slightly. He gave them to someone he knew would finish what he started, no matter the cost. Someone who loved him enough to wait for exactly the right moment. I pulled out my phone. He gave them to me. The study went absolutely still. The night before he died, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, Robert came home late. He kissed me, held me close, and whispered that he'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. He asked me to check our email account in 12 years if anything happened to him. 12 years to the day. I looked at the date on my phone. June 15th, 12 years exactly since Robert's death. I thought it was paranoia, grief talking. But I checked anyway, every year on this date. And last week, an email appeared. Time delayed, set to release on this exact day. It contained everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence Robert had gathered. With instructions. Richard's face had gone pale. You're bluffing. Am I? I held up my phone. He wrote that if I was reading this email, it meant he was dead and you'd gotten away with murder. He wrote that I should wait for a moment when exposing you would cause maximum damage. A moment when you felt safe, victorious, when all your allies were gathered in one place. I looked around the room, at Richard's security, at Clara in her wedding dress, at Emily crumpled against the wall, at Ethan's shattered expression. A moment like a wedding. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at me, and nodded subtly. They're in position. Who's in position? Richard demanded. Robert didn't just leave me evidence, I said. He left me contacts. Journalists he'd worked with. FBI agents who'd wanted to investigate but were blocked by people in your pocket. He gave me a network, Richard. And I've spent the last week activating it. I pressed send on the email I'd drafted that morning, the one containing Robert's files, addressed to 36 recipients. Reporters, federal investigators, the state attorney general's office, every major news outlet in the region. What have you done? Richard whispered. Finished what my husband started. Outside, I could hear the organ music swelling, the processional beginning. Guests would be standing, expecting the bride to appear. Instead, they were about to witness something entirely different. Marcus, are the reporters in position? I asked. He checked his phone again. Embedded among the guests. 3 investigative journalists, 2 with live streaming capabilities. And the FBI team is at the main gate. Richard lunged toward me, but his security grabbed him, not to restrain me, but to hold him back. You old fool. You don't know what you've done. These files will destroy more than just me, they'll bring down senators, judges, businessmen across 3 states. Good, I said simply. Let them all fall. A soft chime echoed through the estate's speaker system, the signal that the ceremony was about to begin. But instead of music, what came next was chaos. Phones started buzzing. First a few, then dozens, then what sounded like hundreds. The sound swelled like a swarm of mechanical bees. Through the study windows, I could see guests pulling out their devices, faces shifting from confusion to shock to horror as they opened the files that were flooding their inboxes. Scanned documents. Audio files. Video footage. 12 years of evidence, all releasing at once. The organ music cut off abruptly. Someone screamed. Through the window, I watched Richard's business partners rising from their seats, phones pressed to their ears, faces ashen. I saw Margaret James, Richard's wife, staring at her phone with a hand over her mouth. I saw guests stumbling away from their chairs, reporters revealing cameras and microphones, pushing toward the front of the ceremony space. "No," Clara whispered, pulling out her own phone. Her face went white as she scrolled through the evidence. "Daddy, you said the files were destroyed." "You said." "He lied," Ethan said quietly, finding his voice for the first time since the confrontation began. "The way he's been lying all along. The way you've been lying." Clara turned to him, desperation replacing calculation. "Ethan, I can explain." "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't say another word to me." The study door burst open. Not Richard's security this time, but real police, state detectives with badges and purpose. Behind them, I glimpsed Marcus slipping away, his job done. Richard James, the lead detective, said, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, racketeering, and approximately 15 other charges that are still being compiled." Richard didn't resist as they cuffed him. His eyes stayed locked on mine, filled with such hatred I felt it like a physical force. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed as they led him past me. "No," I said calmly. "I just restored the balance." Clara collapsed against the desk, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. She wasn't crying, she looked stunned, empty, as if someone had pulled out her batteries. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I knew about the business, the money laundering, but the murder. Daddy said it was an accident." "He said." "He lied to you too," I said, feeling an unexpected flicker of pity. "That's what men like him do. They lie until even their children can't tell truth from fiction." Outside, the chaos was reaching a crescendo. I could hear Richard protesting his innocence, his lawyer's name, his rights. I could hear reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking, the thunderous sound of a carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble. Emily pushed off from the wall, moving toward me on unsteady legs. "Mom, Not now," I said quietly. "We'll talk. But not now." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and stumbled out of the study. I walked to the window and looked out at the ruins of the ceremony. The white chairs were overturned, wedding programs scattered across the grass like fallen leaves. Guests were clustered in groups, phones out, voices rising in shocked conversation. The floral arch stood empty, flowers already beginning to wilt in the heat. Through the crowd, I saw police leading Richard toward a waiting car. His wife was crying, being comforted by friends who would probably abandon her within the week. His business partners were making urgent phone calls, already distancing themselves. Ethan appeared beside me at the window. He'd removed his bow tie entirely, his collar open, his face older than it had been an hour ago. "Grandma," he said quietly, "did you know? All along, did you know what really happened to Grandpa Robert?" "I suspected," I admitted. "But suspicion isn't proof. And without proof, all I had was grief and rage. Your grandfather knew that. He knew I'd need evidence, time, the right moment. So he gave me all three." "He knew he was going to die," Ethan said. "It wasn't a question. I think he knew the risk he was taking. And he took it anyway because some things matter more than safety." I turned to look at my grandson. "I'm sorry you had to learn about your family this way. I'm sorry your wedding became this." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching the chaos outside. Then he said something that nearly broke me. "It wasn't really my wedding, was it? It was Grandpa Robert's final move. I was just a piece on the board." "No," I said firmly, gripping his shoulders. "You were never just a piece. You were the reason. Everything your grandfather did, everything I've done, it was to make sure you could live in a world where the truth matters, where justice isn't just for people who can afford to bury their crimes." Outside, a news van pulled up to the estate gates, satellite dish extending toward the sky. Another followed, then another. By sunset, this would be national news. By tomorrow, international. The wedding that exposed a dynasty. I thought of Robert, of his careful planning, his faith that I would understand, that I would wait for exactly this moment. I thought of all the years of silence, of watching Richard James walk free while my husband rotted in his grave. It's done, I whispered to the ghost I'd been carrying for 12 years. I finished it. You can rest now. Through the window, I watched the last of the wedding flowers trampled underfoot as police and reporters surged across the lawn. Beauty crushed by truth. Celebration consumed by justice. It was the most terrible, necessary thing I'd ever witnessed. And I felt no regret at all. 3 weeks later. The headlines had been inescapable. The wedding that exposed a dynasty, Douglas James ceremony ends in federal arrests. 12-year murder cover-up unravels at society wedding. Grandmother's revenge, how one woman brought down a criminal empire. I'd stopped reading them after the first few days. The truth was out, that was all that mattered. I stood on the deck of the lake house, watching morning mist rise off the water like ascending ghosts. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, clean and uncomplicated. Here, far from the estate and the chaos, I could finally breathe. Tires on gravel. A car door closing. Footsteps on wooden stairs. Grandma, Ethan said softly. Coffee's on the counter, I replied, still watching the lake. Same as always. He moved inside, and I heard familiar sounds, 2 sugars, splash of cream, the way his father had taught him. When he returned, he stood beside me at the railing. How are you holding up? I asked. Ethan let out a long breath. Some days I'm angry. At Clara, at Richard, at myself for being so blind. Other days I just feel empty. Like I lost something I never really had. Love built on lies isn't love, I said gently. It's just another kind of manipulation. I know that now. He sipped his coffee. The annulment went through yesterday. Clara didn't contest it. Her lawyer said she's entering therapy in California. She's cooperating with the FBI, testifying against her father. I considered this. Perhaps there was hope for her after all. And Richard? Denied bail. They've connected him to 4 other suspicious deaths beyond Grandpa Roberts. They're calling him one of the most prolific white-collar criminals in state history. We watched a heron wade through the shallows, patient and deliberate. Mom called me yesterday, Ethan said finally. From London. My chest tightened. Emily, who'd fled 3 days after the wedding, unable to face the reporters, the questions, the weight of her complicity. What did she say? That she's sorry. That she knows she destroyed our family, that she'll never forgive herself. His voice cracked. She asked if you'd ever speak to her again. The question hung in the air like morning mist. I don't know, I admitted. She made choices that enabled your grandfather's murder, Ethan. She took blood money. She stayed silent for 12 years. But she was scared. She was trying to protect me. Fear doesn't excuse everything, I said quietly. And protection built on lies isn't protection, it's just postponing pain. I looked at him. Your mother and I will have to find our own path forward. But you don't have to choose sides. Relief crossed his features. Thank you. Another car approached. Marcus emerged, camera bag over his shoulder. Morning, he called, climbing the stairs. Thought I'd find you both here. While he went for coffee, Ethan asked, did you know? About Marcus working with Grandpa Robert? Not until the wedding. Your grandfather kept that secret well. Marcus returned, leaning against the railing. I need to tell you both something. About why I stayed. We waited. Robert wasn't just a colleague, he was my best friend. Best man at my wedding, godfather to my daughter. The night before he died, he called me. Said things were escalating, asked me to promise that if anything happened, I'd watch over Ethan. Really watch. Protect. Ethan straightened. You've been watching me my whole life? Every school play, every soccer game, every graduation. Always from a distance, always with a camera to justify being there. When you announced your engagement to Clara James, I knew the endgame was approaching. You saved us, Ethan said quietly. I just provided the tools, Marcus said. Your grandmother did the rest. Robert always said she was the strongest person he knew. He was right. The praise sat uncomfortably on my shoulders. I didn't feel strong. I felt old and hollowed out by truth. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in 12 years, peace. I need to go somewhere, I said suddenly. Will you both come with me? The cemetery was quiet on Thursday morning, sunlight filtering through oak trees. We walked through rows of marble until we reached the Douglas family plot. Robert's headstone was simple, beloved husband and father. He stood for truth. I knelt on the grass, not caring that it would stain my slacks. Ethan and Marcus hung back. It's done, my love, I whispered, placing my hand on the sun-warmed stone. They finally paid. Richard's in prison, his empire is crumbling, and the truth you died protecting is finally public. The wind rustled through trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear Robert's voice. Well done, Lauren. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I didn't see the truth sooner, that I almost let Ethan marry into the family that killed you. But we got there. We finished it. I stood slowly, my knees protesting. Ethan moved closer, offering his arm. Justice doesn't heal grief, I said. Your grandfather is still gone. The years we lost are still lost. But it steadies something inside me, knowing the scales have balanced, that truth won over power. He'd be proud of you, Ethan said. He'd be proud of both of us. You're going to be okay, you know. This won't break you. How do you know? Because you're Robert's grandson. You're made of the same steel he was. At the cemetery gates, I paused and looked back at Robert's grave. Grandma? Ethan asked. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about family secrets. About how they don't die, they just wait in the dark, growing heavier. And I'm thinking about how sometimes, it takes a grandmother in pearls to drag them into the light. Marcus smiled. Robert used to say you were the most dangerous woman he'd ever met. I never understood until now. Dangerous? Dangerous to liars. To corrupt men who think age and gender make someone weak. You brought down an empire, Lauren. You waited 12 years and executed it perfectly. It's justice, I corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. That evening, after Ethan and Marcus had left, I sat on the deck with wine and watched the sun set over the lake. The water turned gold, then pink, then deep purple. My phone sat silent beside me, no threatening messages, no encrypted videos, no revelations. Just quiet. Just peace. I thought about Emily in London, trying to outrun guilt. About Clara in California, trying to break free from her father's legacy. About Richard in prison, his power stripped away, facing justice for crimes he'd thought buried forever. And I thought about Robert, about the man who'd loved me enough to plan for my future even as he faced death. The man who'd known I would finish what he started, no matter how long it took. The lake house had witnessed so much. This was where I'd raised Ethan after loss. Where I'd come to terms with my husband's death. Where I'd planned my revenge, piece by careful piece. And this was where I'd finally found rest. I remembered the wedding, the moment I'd pressed send on that email, watching Richard's face as his empire crumbled. The chaos as phones buzzed with evidence, as reporters revealed themselves, as police moved in. The beautiful flowers trampled underfoot as truth consumed celebration. It had been terrible and necessary and right. Marcus had captured it all on camera, not for publication, but for the record. For history. So that what happened to Robert Douglas would never be forgotten, never dismissed as accident or coincidence. The FBI had praised my courage and patience. The media had called me a avenging angel. But I was neither courageous nor angelic. I was simply a woman who'd loved her husband, who'd promised to protect her grandson, and who'd had the luxury of time to plan justice properly. Some called it revenge. I called it restoration. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, each point of light a small victory against darkness. I raised my glass in a silent toast, to Robert, to truth, to the long, patient work of justice. Family secrets don't die, I whispered to the gathering night. They just wait. And sometimes, they wait for a grandmother in pearls to finish the story. My phone buzzed once, a text from Ethan. Thank you, Grandma. For everything. For never giving up. For teaching me that truth matters more than peace. I smiled, tears sliding down my cheeks. Your grandfather taught me that. I'm just passing it on. The lake reflected the emerging stars, each one a testament to the fact that even in darkness, light persists. Even in grief, justice can bloom. Even after 12 years, truth can still win. I thought of the wedding guests, scattered now across the country, still processing what they'd witnessed. The reporters who'd broken the story. The FBI agents who'd finally gotten the evidence they needed. The families of Richard's other victims, finally seeing justice. One grandmother. One wedding. One moment of terrible, perfect truth. And a legacy that would outlive us all. I sat on that deck until the stars filled the sky, until the wine was gone, until the lake was black as ink and just as full of hidden depths. Tomorrow, I would call Emily. Not to forgive, forgiveness would take time, if it came at all, but to start the conversation. To begin the slow work of rebuilding what had been broken. Tomorrow, I would help Ethan plan his next steps, graduate school, perhaps, or travel, anything to help him heal. Tomorrow, I would start the foundation in Robert's name, using the recovered stolen funds to actually help veterans instead of using them as cover for crime. But tonight, I simply sat with the knowledge that some debts, no matter how long they wait, are always paid in full.